introductory video about the Gamini Korea Foundation.
The Sri Lanka Innovators Forum, SLIF, is an initiative of the Gamini Korea Foundation aimed at meaningfully contributing towards resolving the complex economic issues confronting the country today. The Gamini Korea Foundation was founded to take forward the passion of Dr. Gamini Korea to achieve just and equitable economic development in all countries. The late Dr. Gamini Korea was an internationally renowned Sri Lankan economist and an outstanding product of the universities of Cambridge and Oxford. Born on the 4th of November 1925 to Dr. C.V.S. Korea and Freda Korea, sister of Sir John Kotalavala, the then Prime Minister of Ceylon. Dr. Gamini Korea's grandfather and granduncle were the famous freedom fighters from Chilo, Victor Korea, who was a member of the Legislative Council of Ceylon, and Charles Korea. His uncle, Sir Claude Korea, was at the forefront of Sri Lanka's entry onto the world stage at the independence and for many years thereafter. Gamini Korea was educated at the Royal College Colombo, after which he started his higher education at the University of Ceylon in 1944 before going to study at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge and Nuffield College, Oxford from 1945 to 52. There he obtained 2 BAs and MAs from the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge and a DPhil from University of Oxford. He was the first Sri Lankan to obtain a doctorate in economics. He was also the first Sri Lankan to obtain a doctorate from Oxford University in any subject. He was a key member of the Planning Committee for Sri Lanka's first 10-year plan, 1959, which sought to raise economic growth and reduce poverty. Among his numerous achievements was his appointment as the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, where he negotiated the terms of the Lome Convention, a landmark agreement providing development and access to European markets to Africa and the Caribbean. He was an early proponent of the equitable development who worked tirelessly for trade and development in developing countries. The Gamini Korea Foundation provides opportunities for meaningful economic engagement through rigorous multidisciplinary research to promote inclusive and sustainable development. The Gamini Korea Foundation, an autonomous non-profit institution, is committed to making a real and lasting difference in the lives of vulnerable people. The Sri Lanka Innovators Forum, SLIF, has been conceptualized by Gamini Korea Foundation to bring about change and infuse innovation into the processes of democratic governance and sustainable economic development. It aims to pursue in-depth research and dialogue, focusing on core sectors that need to be addressed and suggest innovative, results-oriented policy strategies to resolve the current economic crisis. The Sri Lanka Innovators Forum will bring together the like-minded thought leaders and industry stakeholders to discuss, debate and agree on pressing issues in a variety of sectors and devise alternative, sustainable economic models, processes and practices. A group of thought leaders who are also subject experts have been assigned to review the issues papers and provide necessary guidance and relevant research material to the respective authors. SLIF will transcend boundaries and barriers and invite specialists from all over the world to contribute their expert views and knowledge to enable Sri Lanka to face its current challenges effectively. 20 identified sectors have been assigned to experts to research and write issues papers on contemporary issues which have an impact on socio-economic development. The discourse will commence with questions that should be raised on good governance and administrative reforms. The other topics are tourism, export-oriented industrial development, macroeconomic policy, poverty reduction, reforming Sri Lanka's state-oriented enterprises, Sri Lanka's electricity and petroleum industry, Sri Lankan food crops, livestock and fisheries, transportation and highways, education, healthcare, shipping and logistics, international trade and investment, subnational policies, environment, women and development, ethnicity and socio-economic development, information technology and foreign policy. The outcome of these issues papers forms a blueprint to be presented to policymakers as a landmark contribution from the Gamini Korea Foundation towards strengthening the economic recovery of Sri Lanka. You are invited to join the Sri Lanka Innovators Forum by logging on to the Gamini Korea website. Fill in the registration form. Choose an area of expertise where you would like to share your knowledge, advice and comments on the issues papers posted under each thematic area. Sri Lanka Innovators Forum, Beyond the Barriers of Tradition. The Sri Lanka
In order to commence today afternoon's proceedings, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to take their seats. First of all, I would like to invite the issues paper writer Sanjeeva Abeygoonewardena to take his seat. Session chair will be Professor Amal Kumarage. Sir, if you can take your seat. Panelist, I would like to invite Mr. Rohan Masakurala, Mr. Ted Mutaya, Mr. KDS Ruarchandra, and Mr. Krishanta Fernando. Please take your seats, sir. I would like to now welcome the chairman of the Gamini Korea Foundation, Dr. Lloyd Fernando, to say a few words to welcome you. Dr.
This is yours. Why don't you read it out? You read this out and I'll speak out. Huh? Huh? The vote of thanks. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon or good evening rather to all of you. I'm delighted to see some very important people here. I'm sure who will be able to make a good contribution to the thinking process on a subject which is very, very important and I know very little about. And my main reason for being here is to listen to the experts and to learn about subject matter which we have neglected in the past. I'm thanking you for being here and encouraging us with our work in the Gamini Korea Foundation. I must also say I'm delighted to see Mr. Sanjeeva Abeygoonewardena, who brings nostalgic memories to me. His father and I, we were classmates, and so it's wonderful to see Sanjeeva growing up, having grown up, now is in a position to tell us all about how to get along with the development process. I don't want to get into the subject matter about which I said I know very little about, but I have lots of questions to ask, of course. And so without talking about that, let me straight away get on with the job. And who's going to speak first? Sanjeeva? Yes, Sanjeeva is yours. The floor is yours.
Before I begin, I just like to narrate a simple story which I stumbled upon. We all emulate this country, Singapore. It's quite pertinent to the topic that we are about to discuss, or the paper that I had the privilege to write about. And let me just share with you something that struck a strong chord in what we can learn. So in 2021, during a speech by Prime Minister Lee, when he was addressing the nation during a National Day rally, he mentioned about Singapore's development plan for the next decade. And one thing that was quite profound was that he laid down what it takes to take Singapore beyond just a generation. In doing so, he asked how he went about it. He asked his cabinet members, whatever decision that we take today will not bear any fruit for the next 3 to 5 years, which means your term will end. And if you're willing to forego the merit or credit that the policy makers or the decision makers and the ministries were to take, and only if you are willing to do that and forego credit, that we will embark on some of these audacious and aspirational goals. And that's how Singapore was built. And to me, this was a important lesson as to why Singapore is where it is today, a country where Lee Kuan Yew once emulated, and to see where Sri Lanka is. Of course, there is still hope, and that's why I thought I will share this story and present my case. Chairman of the Gamini Korea Foundation, Dr. Lloyd Fernando. Deputy Chairman, Dr. Harsha Aturupane. The Board of Directors of the Gamini Korea Foundation. Distinguished panelists. Thankfully there's ladies and gentlemen. I intend to draw your attention to a few high-level points today. The details are in the white paper which was presented, but at a very high level I would like to outline what we are grappling with and how we can address some of these challenges in a very granular level. And it's about priorities. How do we set about priorities in addressing this, keeping in mind that there is a long-term plan ahead of us. In doing so, there are 3 areas that I would like to draw your attention. First is the mindset change to work cohesively beyond self-interest and put our nation first. Let's leave aside our own biases, our tribal mentality, our affiliation, and think as a global player and not as a regional player. That's point number 2. And the third point is the will to push for national policies, and if so, what legislative reforms should we work on? The customs ordinance is my takeaway. Oversight on processes to govern with short, mid to long-term KPIs on what we can define as small and sizable wins. What I have listed may not be anything new to many of you. We have been grappling with the myth of our hub status for over 3 decades. What have we done? What intrigues me is why we have not done enough. We have to adopt an ambidextrous approach towards our goal, which is to deal with the present, keeping in mind the long-term aspirations of what we can achieve. Or else, this will continue to be a myth and fade away right in front of our eyes. Unfortunately, or the bad news, is that there are no quick fixes in this whole process. We need to make decisions that will change the trajectory of Sri Lanka, and this investment to make those changes must come now. It's not just policies which have to be outward and forward-looking, but also our mindset and values as people to look beyond our shores, to welcome ideas and talent, and to accept competition, and to be a champion of change. So why logistics? I think if you read the quote, this says it all, but in my view, logistics is the linchpin between buyers and sellers. It is what makes global trade happen. Logisticians are the unsung heroes of global trade, and I'm sure COVID made it quite profound and made it obvious that without logistics, the world does not move. It just comes to a standstill. Logistics is a byproduct of trade in any form. Hence, the agenda of my presentation will cover logistics at a global view. Again, what we need to understand is what's happened in the past is past, but we can look to the future and understand what's ahead of us how consumer behavior is changing, how is the landscape for logistics and trade, global trade changing, and how do we leverage on those positions as a Sri Lankan nation. We'll talk about indexes, why these are important, because at the end of the day, there is a governance framework that the world follows. And if we can work towards some of these indexes that make you improve your position as a nation, that will help us move the needle up. So from a global standpoint, this is where the trajectory is. It's all in numbers in terms of value. But I just want to highlight what's important in this is the regional growth. If you take Asia Pac, Sri Lanka falls into this area and this category, and this is where you see the largest trajectory in terms of growth. And what this means to Sri Lanka is that how can we serve, or how do we position ourselves and leverage on this opportunity? So I'm going to continue to harp on this word. All of these data, all of these statistics, what does this tell us? How do we leverage on this opportunity of a place called Sri Lanka, which we've been talking of for the longest time and advocating a location, a location, and a location. So APAC is poised to grow. The largest regional growth in the continent is in this area for the next 7 years, and that's what the numbers are projecting. Going back to, again, a granular level of the logistics industry, this is, again, the total logistics market broken into container handling, air freight, which accounts to 9% of the global trade. 90% of trade happens through containerization, and what's more important is the emerging logistic landscape, which is called the connected logistics product, which is end-to-end logistics, which is creating traction, creating convenience to consumers, and integrating logistics across the portfolio of end-to-end services that are being offered. So this enables, from the point of shipping, clearing, land transportation, warehousing, all of it, rather than customers going to different parties for different service sectors as we've traditionally done. Just to give you a snapshot of Sri Lanka and its logistics landscape. The quote that is there, Sri Lanka is a well-established logistics hub in South Asia. This is not what I said, this is what Google says. And it highlights the importance of why we can, or how we can leverage this nation as a significant point as a to gain its status as a hub in the Indian subcontinent. Again, this is a fact which is known to all of us, and the question is, how do we now pivot from here? So just to give you a little snapshot of Sri Lanka, during the last 5 years, the World Shipping Council has consecutively ranked Sri Lanka's Colombo port amongst the top 50 world container ports above other South Asia ports based on the volume and the containers handled. Sri Lanka's logistics services contributed 2.5% of gross domestic product, representing around $2 billion US. Logistics services include container trucking, warehousing, ports, and shipping, but exclude domestic transport of passengers, fisheries, and interregional domestic cargo transportation services. The total share of logistics in national exports is estimated at 7%. The industry provides full-time direct employment to over 40,000 to 50,000 people. Around 70% of registered service providers are of local origin, while the rest are multinational. There are 130 shipping agencies and 120 freight forwarders in the association, and accounts of 500 plus companies registered with the Merchant Shipping Secretariat, including clearing agents. In addition to Expanding its seaports, the country also has the highest road density in South Asia, with 174 kilometers of roads per 100 square kilometers of land, connecting all major seaports and airports. The country also has 22 international and domestic airports. In the Indian Ocean, one of the third of the global, we are positioned as one of the third global bulk shipping trade lanes, including petroleum products and coal transit points across the region. Hence, the maritime sector facilitates the economies of many countries in Southeast Asia. One of the challenges we've also faced in collecting data is that we actually have no accurate data in terms of gathering information. This was part of the NES, National Export Strategy, and one of the challenges we wanted to overcome was to gather data. And the funny thing was that everybody wants data, but no one wants to provide data. Everyone wants to have accurate information, but this is something that we've witnessed firsthand. When you go to trade associations and ask for information, everyone holds back information. So our benchmark here was the national statistics of Singapore, where every industry sector is connected across all their regulatory framework, and all information was able to, anyone can basically have access to information. Moving on, in this particular slide, I'd like to draw your attention on one point, which is we have one of the highest productivity rates in terms of crane operations. I'm sure Ted would be able to advocate more on this, especially with SAGT and CICT. We boast of natural deep water drafts that can accommodate ultra-large container vessels. How can we leverage on this position based on point number 3, which is during the last 5 years, the World Shipping Council has ranked the Sri Lanka port amongst the top 50 world container ports. If you research the trends with predictive data and shorter lead times, the hub and spoke concept will continue to evolve via LCL and container loads. What must we do to take Sri Lanka, and how do we make a unique selling proposition for Sri Lanka going forward? So moving on from the logistics landscape from a global perspective and from Sri Lanka, again, we would like to understand what's in it or what's trending in logistics. There is a concern for environment, supply chains, digital and automation, of course, congestions at ports, continued disruptions and equipment and space scarcities. But I'd like to focus on one thing, which is on blockchain. Blockchain attracts the highest startup funding, raising it almost over 90% in terms of creating venture capitalist interest between the periods of 2017 to 22, which is one of the reasons why companies like CMA CGM, Maersk, and MSC are investing heavily in blockchain. It also gives more visibility in terms of visibility and transparency in the value sector, in moving up the value chain in supply chain in the supply chains. It also talks about inventory visibility, cross-border, and quick commerce, which is driven by, again, consumer demand, the notion of instant gratification. I'd like to share one story that Walmart did in terms of investing in blockchain. They had a program called Farm to Fork, and in this whole program, it was all about trying to trace 2 mangoes and the movement of goods. So, using traditional methods, this whole technique took almost 2.5 weeks for them to trace where the mangoes were grown all the way till it ended up on someone else's plate. Using blockchain technology, it took them only 2 seconds to get this information. And that's the power of technology and blockchain that's actually going to transform how goods are going to be shipped and how transparent we should be in terms of reporting and giving clarity to our buyers and sellers. Moving on, these are some of the top trends that are seen in terms of shaping the logistics industry. This is based on a Gartner's report. I'm not going to dwell too much, but this is all to do with what is trending in the logistics industry and the landscape and how we can leverage and what we have done in terms of investing in some of these top 10 technologies that are basically here to stay. Moving on, we'll touch base on some of the challenges that we might face, as much as there is disruptions, as much as there is global evolvement of global trade. And I'd like to focus on 2 points, which is one is the extended warehouse management and the impact Sri Lanka can have in this area, and how we can improve in providing data and insights. Sri Lanka can facilitate transshipment at a reduced cost based on our location when comparison to regional players like Singapore and Dubai. We can leverage on our free zone warehousing concept in creating more warehousing opportunities, giving visibility and data within the region. As we've seen, the largest impact or the growth trajectory is in the APAC region. Hence, there will be more movement of goods in this part of the world. So this is apart from the fact that everyone's highlighting the fact that cost has to come down, yes. But still, when everyone's grappling for price reductions, we as a nation needs to look at how can we move up the value chain in creating this hub status within the region. Then I'd like to go on to the next one, which is the indices or the indexes, which actually help us to move the needle up. And one of the most important areas is the Logistics Performance Index. As you can see, Sri Lanka is ranked LPI ranking is 73, and the only area that we've slipped down is in terms of customs reinforcing the need for reform and overhaul archaic procedures and regulations. The customs ordinance was established in 1806, which is one of the oldest customs organizations in the world. We need to make progressive steps in terms of being a promoter of trade and not an inhibitor of trade. Policing is fine, but it has to be more progressive and has to be looked upon in creating more wealth for the nation and create a multiplier effect. It has to also facilitate trade, and these are all adapted in the WTO in how WTO operates. And if you go through the World Customs Ordinance, everything is about trade facilitation, cross-border facilitation. We've had many dialogues with a simple thing like introducing the de minimis in Sri Lanka. It's been a treacherous task to get that enacted. So the highlight here is, again, look at the top 5 emerging logistic markets in the region and look at what India and China are doing to keep moving the needle up in terms of LPI. So if you look at, again, focusing purely on the APAC region, it's China, India, Indonesia, and Malaysia. All these countries are doing something right to move the LPI up, and Sri Lanka must act now if we are also to establish the fact that we want to be a logistics hub in Sri Lanka. Then we go into the ease of doing business. Here, what we can do in terms of taking a cue from places like Dubai, like Singapore. They continue to invest in the investor confidence and bring in more entrepreneurs and businesses into their countries. What have we done in terms of continuing to attract new businesses? What's the landscape that we have created to bring in more SMEs, create more opportunities for SMEs within the region to set up offices here? Not only for SMEs, but also for BPO operations and the digital nomads. There is a glaring opportunity of attracting digital nomads into Sri Lanka, and that's one area that we just need to leverage on. It's a wonderful place to holiday, and how can we leverage on this position and this location to create this environment? How will these indexes support the logistics industry to set up regional offices, training centers and shared services compared to other countries that are also quietly picking up? We also as a nation have the ability or the innate competence to communicate better and comprehend better compared to some other countries that also have shared services which they're grappling to hold on to. So why not we make use of this position to see how we can nurture our human capital in a different way. Going back to innovation and and digital readiness. So these are two other areas. Sri Lanka's level of innovation and the digital readiness index. India is by far leading in terms of, so India tops the list on digital readiness index in the world with a score of 63 out of 100, while Sri Lanka is 24 out of 100. This is an opportunity for Sri Lanka if we are to position ourselves as a hub and serve India, then India serving themselves. The publication that came on trade digitalization, which leads to efficiency gains in both exporters and importers, if you see, the yellow bar is a good indicator as to how much we've managed to save time in terms of hours when we do transactions using digital formats. One thing also to highlight is as much as there is a digital readiness index and Sri Lanka is preparing for it, we have to also look at our innovation index, which is pretty significantly low compared to India. And one area what comes out strongly is the funding for logistics in markets which are using sustainable logistic methods in the world are increasing the funding capacity by 12% compared to 2012. So there is more funding coming into sustainable logistics compared to other sectors. And the share for total logistics in startup funding has grown from 16% to 36% in the last 2 years. The largest chunk in terms of investments for startups is going into healthcare, which is 85 billion. This is from a global standpoint. Fintech, which is 83 billion. Energy sector, which is 51 billion. And the logistics and transportation industry takes the 4th place, so which also complements or also assures the fact that there is more investment and innovation taking place in the logistics industry, in the logistics landscape. Now, what does this tell us? If you don't leverage on the fact that there is innovation coming in, if you don't look at opportunities to attract some of these innovations into our country, there are many others who are also willing to accept them, especially in the regional APAC region, be it Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan. So we need to really work on some of these reforms swiftly. This is an interesting one. This is on corruption. I'm not going to dwell too much, but if one may question what has corruption got to do with investment. It's got everything to do with investment and confidence building, and it also has an impact on logistics. The more investment that comes in, it creates more opportunities for trade and commerce, and that's the correlation that they have. There is and that's why I thought it's important to highlight the corruption perception index of Sri Lanka. Looking at global benchmarks, these are some of the reasons why these countries have flourished because of global benchmarks. Mostly the location, which we have in which is what we have as well. Modern facilities, border control and service centers, innovation and state-of-the-art technology. And which is why I also highlighted the fact that technology and innovation is extremely important, that we cannot rule that out, because that's what's going to create future investments into our country. And the important point is global competition. We need to be positioning ourselves, and we need to compete with the world and not in the region. So if you are to compete with the global with the globe, we need to lift up our game and also have have a mindset of bringing in best practices that you can learn from the best. Here is the global hub for this. I just thought I'll share, because Hong Kong continuously becomes the world's busiest air cargo hub and also tops in terms of cargo handling. Why is this important? This is important mainly because Hong Kong is located in Asia, in the center of Asia. It's a 4-hour flight which can reach major markets in Asia Pacific region, and a 5-hour flight to make it within the range of more than half of the world's population. Our location also can offer similar access to business expanding into this region, and we just need to understand this and leverage on this concept if we are to create more, to make Sri Lanka also attractive as a air hub. So drawing into the conclusion of this study, what can we learn? This is the final part. As a country, India will surpass Germany in terms of GDP by 2027. India will surpass Japan by 2029. How can we leverage the growth of India? The African continent is the next big thing, and once trade starts growing there, that's when we actually have the opportunity to create more air traffic coming into Sri Lanka. This is also I'm referring to the east coast of Africa. How can we make storage, fulfillment more accessible, economical and movable to meet shorter lead times within this region? In addition, opportunities for offshore engineering, crew changes, mid-sea bunker and husbanding services, and dry docking are some of the other possible areas we can work towards in creating our own niche. Again, based on what the best do, my 3 takeaways are: policies that drive exports and eradicate export barriers, including MCC and entrepot operations. Second is sustained investment in the logistics industry and investment in technology. The government's commitment to investing even resources in the nation's logistics industry and its infrastructure and ecosystem. These are the top 3 takeaways. If we can work on some of these areas, I think we can start to see the needle moving forward. Recommendations and next steps. The Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation had this to say about Sri Lanka: red tape, poor infrastructure, lack of policy cohesion, weak destination marketing, no consensus and limited research were identified as the critical bottlenecks to taking Sri Lanka from good to great. Again, I can only reiterate the 3 points that I have highlighted here, the top 3 ones: having a national logistics policy, and more importantly, once you have a policy, I think we've had policy documents over and over, but we also need a governance framework which also can highlight quick wins, KPIs that can govern the entire process. Relevant and progressive legislation with logistics as a line ministry in line with the first world nations. Private and public will, which is the most important thing, which will work in the short to mid-term in terms of execution. The education system needs to be revisited, and if one reads the statistics and the indexes on Sri Lanka's children's climate change risk and standards of education published by the UNICEF, it reflects how much emphasis needs to be placed on education, to say the least. The most vulnerable are those in primary education. On reform, especially the NES, the National Export Strategy, which was formulated, you don't have to look too far. All we need to do is to pick up those documents and activate them again. The National Single Window in Sri Lanka should be revisited. It should mean all those 34 agencies involved in publishing trade-related information would begin to cooperate more effectively in keeping with the spirit of the country's new Rights to Information Act. They would have to build a relationship of transparency and accountability with the trading communities and businesses they interact with. Once there is clarity on regulations and the process itself, the government will have an opportunity to streamline the way it works, undoing unnecessary duplication of work while promoting efficiency and service delivery. While most trade is on shipping, the biggest delays occur at seaports, airports, and multimodal facilities. Policies targeting these facilities can help improve reliability. This was said by the World Bank Group Macroeconomics Trade and Investment Senior Economists under Global Practices. Such policies include improving clearance processes and investing in infrastructure, adopting digital technologies, and incentivizing environmental and sustainable logistics by shifting to less carbon-intensive freight modes and more energy-efficient warehousing. We also need to consider bringing more technocrats into the mainstream. And finally, let's revisit the narrative of an innovation-led hub status. To innovate, we need to invest in science and technology. To leapfrog, we require the will, the grit, and the mindset to look beyond 2 to 3 years. Look beyond what's in it for me. We always start asking ourselves, if we want to take an initiative for our nation, what's in it for me? So I think it's time that we move beyond this. We must have the courage for tough discussions, tough decisions that may not be popular. Learn to be a tad unpopular for the right reason of being objective for our motherland. Deal with uncomfortable realities and address the elephant in the room. The choice is ours. We must fix and address these harsh realities now. It's not left to the next generation. Despite dark clouds, the world still offers many opportunities for those who dare to seize them. Economic growth is a means to an end, not the end itself. It must be inclusive growth that benefits all Sri Lankans so that we can all fulfill our aspirations and see our children live better lives than what we have. This is how Sri Lankans must be uplifted, generation after generation. So, ladies and gentlemen, simply put, the important points are that we act now on certain priorities which actually will lead to long-term benefits in terms of shaping our country as a logistics hub. On that note, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanjeeva, for a wonderful presentation, very informative. I would like to now invite Professor Amal S. Kumarage to start the panel discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sohan, and a very good evening to everybody in the audience. And I would also like to add my appreciation for that wonderful delivery, Sanjeeva. And my first task as the chairman of the panel is to introduce the other panel members. And I think if you're in the logistics sector, none of them need any introduction. They are all familiar and well-known faces. But for the record, Mr. Rohan Maskoral, in my immediate left, he describes himself as a futurist, economist, educator, and entrepreneur. Amidst many other roles he has played over the 32 years he has been in the business, both here and overseas. He is also CEO of the Shippers Academy and plays multiple roles in different areas of advisory as well as professional services in logistics. Then next we have Mr. Krishanta Fernando, I believe from Elis. Yes, he's from Elis, as well as from CASA. And he also has 25 years of experience in the business sector. He's an IT professional and involved with many areas of business development, ERP systems, and so on. And I think that's a perspective which we need to have in terms of modernizing our business approaches. Then we have Mr. Ruanchandra, Mr. KDS Ruanchandra, Secretary to the Ministry of Ports and Shipping. And he is also a very senior, one of the senior most special grade officers of SLAS, and has been in this position, I think, now for a couple of years as the secretary. And I'm sure he's gathered enough insight into the many issues that face government in trying to develop this sector. And when we have another familiar face, Mr. Ted Mutaya, Chief Commercial Officer of SAGT, who's been in the business for many years and I think a proud member of the SAGT team that has brought in a lot of innovation and I would say benchmarking to the industry in Colombo. So we have a very accomplished panel here. I think that can add value to the very valuable work already, the valuable work that Sanjeeva has put together. I think this paper you wrote probably last year, end of last year, at the invitation of the Gamini Korea Foundation. And today it's the presentation and it's your opportunity to comment on it and so on. So, so my task is to first ask each of the panelists to respond to what has been presented to us and also the paper that has been made available to us as panelists. And then before we go to the panel discussion or the question and answer session, I would also like to ask them to respond to a couple of ideas I just had, if you can each respond to that thought. I think, well, Sanjeeva referred to the elephant in the room, and I think this is something that we all agree that there is an elephant in the room. Because I don't think that there's anybody here who can vehemently disagree with Sanjeeva to either the potential we have as a nation in this area or the problems we have. Okay. Well, if one of you, I think probably that's the first thing that we need to put out. But what I would like you to comment is, why is it that we have this gap, and a gap that seems to be getting away from us? It's always heartbreaking to see other countries with lesser potential getting ahead on the LPI and so on. I just read Sanjeeva's paper today, and I found that India is ahead of us on all counts. Even Bangladesh, Myanmar, and I think Bhutan also is ahead on one count of the 7 indicators. So how is it that we, who have a long history of logistics way ahead of all of these countries, and having so many resources, not just infrastructure but position, locational as well as human resources, are somehow not bridging this gap? What is your take on the single most influential missing factor that has eluded us? So that's my request, if you can find one. So I begin with giving the opportunity to Mr. Rohan Maskorale, who I think will be able to set the sort of platform for all other responses. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you first for the Gamini Korea Foundation for giving me this opportunity, and Sanjeeva pestering me while I was in Australia that I have to be on this panel, which I originally said I have spoken enough for 32 years. Maybe some new people should be speaking on this subject. I think when I read your paper, Sanjeeva, I think I confirm that we do have parallel universes in the system. You know what a parallel universe is? There's another universe out there which is completely different, because you talk about artificial intelligence, robotics, and the new wave of thinking how modern world is doing. So I come from a background, to tell you all of my education. I started my university education in the United States, and then supply chain side I got it from UK, and then I started the Shippers Academy in a country which Sanjeeva touched on, is Singapore. Singapore Shippers Academy had a vision in 2009. When we started it, I was a founder member there, and then of course I am Australian Sri Lankan dual citizen, which I am never shy to say, because I migrated this country 1997, when my boss said that when there is no political and economic stability in a country, it's both railways are not right, you are in danger zone. And actually every country has either political instability or economic instability, but when you have both together, recipe is not good. And today we have got the results of that recipe. We don't have to shy away, because we are all here probably Sri Lankans by heart, and whatever we have done to our country is also our responsibility, right or wrong. We have done it on the wrong track. That's the reality. So coming into straight away to your question about where we went wrong, probably we had smart people in the past also, very smart people. I am looking for a Kalukal, I am looking for a Lalita Tulatmudari, I am looking for a Ronnie Dimmel. If you look at running the port sector, I finally worked with Ronnie Dimmel for some time. But I'm still looking. I don't think that we have that vision, mission, and action plan in this country. We have a lot of talk, sadly to say that, Professor, but I've been in so much of involvement in this, so we have not moved. And that's why you said India has passed us. That's why you said Nepal, Bangladesh is passing up. Ethiopia, one time, which was looked at as some some place not in this world, is passing us. And we've got stagnated on whatever we are doing. And again, we have to look inwards in this whole thing. Why? So I just wanted to pick up on one thing. So what Sanjeeva talked about this presentation, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of what the productivity and all that is. We all know that these numbers are not good. And one time we were somewhere around 130s in the logistics performance index, but I don't know, I don't believe in the logistics performance index very much. I challenged it once with the World Bank. And the ease of doing business is no more there. World Bank has taken it out. So again, another country complained the way they have done it. And so don't worry about that too much. Worry about the ground situation. When you go to customs, can you get something done easily? When you go to the SLPA, LCL clearing area, can you get things done without bribing people? You don't have to ask the World Bank to say on logistics performance index. If you want to get something done from the motor traffic division, how difficult it is. How much emails are replied. Simple things. I'm not talking about the high-tech artificial intelligence stuff in this country. How do we get responses from people fast? Now this is all related to the logistics of international trade. Why have global companies not embraced Sri Lanka? Why have all the regional head offices of shipping has gone to India? We must answer these questions rather than saying India has the regional offices. Dubai, which was a fishing village 40 years ago, has the global 56 to 70 global headquarters. Singapore has about 140. So numbers are all there. We need to address that. So we need strong political leadership with a vision, mission and action plan and a national plan. Now only thing we had a national plan was the Mahavali project, which every government carried forward. And it was a success. And the Mahavali was designed and measured and architected by the Americans. Today if the Americans do a logistics plan, they will say the country is going to be taken over by the Americans. So we have got a huge mindset problem as a country. That's what I see. Because I'm exposed to the other countries, I feel just like Professor Amal Kumar gave, very sorry about Sri Lanka. So Sanjeeva, my comments are on education. And let me tell you something. You talked about the UNICEF report. I think I mentioned this at the recently held the Governor's Challenge Trophy. I made a presentation about the UNICEF report. Primary education in this country. You know, I think Ted ourselves, our life, I think we are already in the retirement ages, right? It's the primary education. Children are the ones who are going to take over this country for the so-called developed country in 2048. If the president has spelled out a vision for a developed nation, that is 12,000 per capita around income by 2048. That's not far away. Now our primary education has fallen rock bottom. 85% of our children are below global standards. That's the UNICEF report says. Now the issue is, let me give you a small example, because I come from this multiple number of countries. Singapore's primary education is number 2 in the world in mathematics. Other areas also, but mathematics is the key subject. They measure mathematics. Australia fell from 2 to 7. Now among the world's 100 and 220 territories and countries, Australia is number 7. Singapore moved to number 7 in primary school mathematics. In Sri Lanka, we know at ordinary level nearly 50% fails mathematics. Right? These are benchmarks that those countries look at. Do you know what happened in Australia? I was there about 2 months back, and it was reported on BBC also. The Australian government had a debate on it. And do you know what they talked about? These are the visions and how they look at their country. What did they say? If our children have fallen from number 2 to number 7 in the world for primary school mathematics, in 20 years, this is going to affect Australia's GDP and innovation in competing in the world platform. Now that's why I said, will you hear anybody talking here in that sense of thinking? That's why I said we have parallel universes. Now that is where they are worried. That is, our children are going to get such a good gap, and our poverty is going to increase in the next 20 years if this is the gap we are going to create in the world. And the UNICEF says 85% here is no standard to the world. How can we become an international economic center if the human resources of this country is not built to fix the problem of competition, innovation, which is Sanjeeva's topic? It is scary. It is absolutely scary, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to talk about the subject. I'm not interested in the subject. I know all what Sanjeeva said. I know. I have done, and I have written papers. I have written to the I have policy makers. I have given reports. All that. I also would like to take a minute to read a friend of mine. You will say, who is this friend? He is the Education Minister of Singapore, Chan Chung Sing. He is actually a friend of mine. I met him many times. You know what he said in Parliament this April? He took over as the Education Minister some time back. I'll just read it out for you. It's interesting. We will invest in our people throughout life, not just 15 years when they are in our schools, but also for the next 50 years beyond our schools. This is killing people. Singapore is based on people. Our people will need to continually upskill, reskill across their lifetime to evolve at their own speed, create new value, stay ahead of competition. Government's efforts alone will not be enough. We will need the partnership of industry, the innovation of institutions, and growth mindset of individuals. Now, this is the country that we were talking to benchmark. Are we hearing this here? To make that aspiration of whatever the hubs we want to do? We've fallen to the rock bottom. I don't say it's rock bottom yet. We've fallen. But if we don't take corrective steps now, there are other examples of countries like Somalia. We can get into that. If people are uneducated, if people are fighting for the same resources, you have to think 20, 30 years when you're planning a nation. That is what Lee Kuan Yew always talk about. He's tough and he talks about a vision, and he drives that vision. In Sri Lanka, I'm sorry to say, we have been talking about this hub status since I got my grey hair. There is no plan, action plan. If you look at our container terminal developments, they are delayed. We had a progressive SAGT in 1999. We stopped the East Container Terminal getting into PPP. Now, is that moving forward or is that going backwards? We had a fantastic operation under SAGT in 1999. That was a game changer in South Asia. What we do, by the time we went to 2021, government goes back on policy. So what's the problem? Problem is here. Problem is decision making. Problem is knowledge. Problem is know-how. So we have a problem in our hand, not only the economic problem that the president is trying to solve. Every problem today in the country has to go to the president. How can one man solve the issue? I only see one minister who is taking the bull by the horn right now is Kanchana Wijesekara on the electricity reforms. Mangala Samaravira tried his best to do customs reforms, which Sanjeeva has touched. The biggest elephant, probably in my opinion, didn't allow. And today you can see the environment is the same. So Sanjeeva talks about a very high standard world which we have to look at and compare. But the reality is we have to get our fundamentals right. Try to fix one by one. At least one by one. We are not fixing anything, we are talking. And we are talking on this location at every forum. UAE is not on a location, UAE is on north of the shipping corridor. Dubai is not alongside like Singapore or us. It's north. But there is a book, ladies and gentlemen, read by the UAE leader called My Vision. My Vision 1 and My Vision 2. It's published. It's very much available. Lee Kuan Yew's book is there called From First World to Third World. If anybody wants to know how they did it, I don't think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's there. Just that we don't have that thirst, guidance and the leadership in this country. For a very long time we don't have it. I can definitely tell, I have worked with Lalit Athulatmudali. He is the one who brought me into this trade in 1990s, just before he passed. And I worked with Mr. Ronnie DeMille for a long time, which I realized very easy to work with. But now I doubt, except the president whom I can give a half a page note to read something, but his bag is too full. It's overflowing. So I don't know. I feel the direction is education, Sanjeeva. Thank you. I talked a lot, but sorry.
So thank you, Ron. And so it's very clear that your perception on this is that we haven't got the fundamentals in education, and we don't have the political leadership to make things happen. So anyway, I think I hold slightly different views on that. But anyway, I think we can take that up during the discussion. I would like to go to Mr. Krishanta Fernando, your take on the paper, and what is it that you see as the single most important missing link?
Thank you, Professor, and thank you very much to the Foundation for inviting me. So I also function as the chairman of the documentation and IT committee of CASA. So I told Sanjeeva that my views mainly would revolve around the kind of work that we have done to support digitalization, in trade facilitation and so on. So I read with interest Sanjeeva's paper. So one of the highlights that I picked up there was that Sanjeeva's mentioned that some of the things that we do, the plans, have a very short-term view, right? And then so the outcomes are again driven on a short-term basis, and he highlights the importance of having medium to long-term initiatives and plans and frameworks, and he gives a few examples like a single window and things like that, which would take the overall level up in the industry. So he also obviously speaks about the catchment areas, talking about India and Bangladesh, tapping into these markets. How do we do? I mean, like Rohan said, we always speak about the strategic location that we are in, but then to improve connectivity and to improve productivity, some of the things that we have done or not done, so to say, are the ones which are concerning. So, I mean, in particular, Professor Amal, you asked about the single most important thing. Yeah, maybe very few things I was just thinking about when you asked this question. I think a drive, a leadership drive and empowerment, because as a private sector and as an association, what we have tried to do is we know that it will take some time for the government to get the act together, get the funding for certain national level projects which are pretty big. So I think some of the things that we have discussed at CASA is to see how we can work with some of the institutions together in a collaborative manner. Let's say customs and the ports, the terminals. What can we do given that we have this situation, which we felt that we'll be able to put, act as a pressure group if we can do that. And for example, CASA, like I said, have been working with these institutions, and we have even met ICTA, and very recently we got an opportunity to make a presentation to the senior additional secretary to the president, Mr. Abeygoonewardena, where we made a presentation of the importance of what we call digitization before digitalization. Because you take an example, some of the folk in the industry just tells us that to clear a vessel, of an average size, let's say 400 to 500 containers in a vessel, it takes nearly half a bundle of A4 sheets. It's a ground level, right? Half a bundle of an A4 packet, right? And so with the volumes, it grows more, right? So what are the simple things that we can do? Are the institutions empowered to make decisions to eliminate paper? Simple things like that. So that's one. And you mentioned, Sanjeev, about the ease of doing business and single windows and so on. So we have heard of this initiative by the Ports Authority and the Ministry of a port community system, right? And so we know that the port community systems are in operation in some of the smaller countries like in Africa as well. So although we hear that this is a 10-year plan, 2 years minimum to get the project up and running. Most probably the expression of interest will start next year. But the point that Sanjeev is highlighting is what are the things that we can fast track, right? How can we do certain things in a speedier manner? So do we have the liberty and the time and the comfort to stay for a long time? So these are, I think, some of the pertinent points that I picked up. The industry itself, the maritime industry itself is quite complex. I was just noting down from publicly available information that you have about approximately 45 large processes to effect a single consignment involving roughly about 40 stakeholders, 40 people, and about 105 touch points, right? So that's the kind of industry we are in. So you can, through a single window project or a port community system, you can take a look at the cross industry and give solutions. But at the same time, you can work with institutions and try to see what are some of the bottlenecks that we have, what are the small things that we can do, what are the low-hanging fruit that we can target. So that are some of the solutions that I see that as a private sector together with the government that we need to do to improve on what we are doing right now. Sanjeev, you spoke about the electronic BLs and especially the blockchain BLs. Important, and I think currently what I read was I was just quickly browsing through Google just to figure out, because that's an interesting topic that we are reading. At the moment, only about 2% of the industry uses electronic BLs on blockchains. And the good news is that there's an association called the Digital DCSA, it's called. It's a shipping association who is establishing standards. So they have been able to get agreement from 9 of the top shipping lines in the world to commit to 100% electronic BLs by 2030, right? So now you can see these policies and the long-term plans are established through negotiations and collaboration and so on. So what we need in Sri Lanka also is that will, like Rohan said, and the empowerment and the drive to take some of these initiatives and have some measurable outcomes, maybe short-term, medium and long-term was my view when I was reading the paper. There's another point when Rohan was explaining, I was thinking to myself about empowerment and will, but COVID-19 actually gave us a different perspective altogether. I'll take a simple example. Ted was involved at a very high level at that time to get the electronic delivery order to be done electronically. Now, we have been trying this process for many years between the agents and the authorities and the terminals, but COVID gave us an opportunity to rethink, and within a matter of a couple of weeks, Ted, if I'm not mistaken, all these stakeholders were able to come together and agree on electronically getting the clearance from, I'm speaking on behalf of the shipping agents, to get the delivery order electronically sent, terminals were able to come out with a process, agreed on how these steps would do, what are the conditions on which the changes could be made, and we were able to do that. So if we really have the will and if we are pushed, things can be done. Funding may be a constraint, but I'm sure if we have a solid plan, and there should be possibilities to get funding as well. Yeah, so Sanjeeva also highlighted some of the challenges with a few examples. And on the paper, I would have preferred, I looked for a few examples. You had covered a few examples. And I was talking about this port community system. And very recently, there was a workshop conducted by the SLPA. It was, I think, sponsored. The event was sponsored by the ADB. And Port of Rotterdam, they came and gave a presentation and presented some of the facts, how the port community system in Port of Rotterdam has helped them. Right? So they were quoting from 50 million electronic messages in 2012, it has reached 150 million electronic messages in 2023, which has saved them 10 kilometers equivalent of stacked paper, right? And then they have saved 100 million emails and 20% reduction of waiting time for a port call. So that's the kind of measures that were presented in this public workshop. So the potential is huge. It's just that I feel the empowerment and the drive to answer Professor Kumarage's question will take us through, but also to target low-hanging fruit between the stakeholders.
Thank you for bringing that dimension, Krishanta. I think the gist of Sanjeeva's paper is also how you bring in modern technology, digitalization, Industry 4.0, supply chain 4.0, integration with not just port operations but the entire supply chain. And I think these are probably some of the drivers that can help us. So I think we'll pick that up during our discussion, and I would like you to also formulate your own questions on these particular areas so that we can add some more thoughts to complete the paper. So I will next go on to Mr. Ruwan Chandra to give us a perspective as an administrator on how he sees, because often we all see government as the bottleneck that is disengaging the clutch, which is trying to move the vehicle forward. The private sector being the engine that tries to move it forward. Gatekeepers is the term that is used of those who are positioned strategically, who prevent actually instead of aiding and helping, they actually end up doing the opposite. So what is your take on the government sector? Is there really a problem in the way the government is handling the ports and shipping side? How can the industry as a whole work towards this? I think Krishanta mentioned about what happened during COVID. I recall a similar experience in the transport sector after tsunami. Somehow whenever we have a crisis, we work together. Other times we prefer not to. So how do you make this magic of working together? Your thoughts?
Okay, good evening everyone, ladies and gentlemen. And let me thank the foundation organizing this event. And I am so pleased and happy to be here with this distinguished the invited guests, especially with the senior professionals and the industry experts all are here with us. So thank you very much, in fact, that giving this opportunity for me as to interact with all of you. Initially, in fact, that we understand that the situation as a whole, that the points raised in this document, of course, that not limited to port and shipping. So Mr. Masakor also mentioned that we understand the system, that we know that during last maybe 50, 60 or even beyond that what we did just after independence, and we understand that a lot of missed opportunities that we had in the history. But however, that rather than talking this, the previous one, I prefer to little bit enlighten on that what we do a little bit. I understand that there should be a system change required, but unfortunately at our level it is not possible. So what is possible is that from the ministry's point of view, the actions that need to be taken and carry on. And there are a lot of the concepts that are there, but those are translated or transformed to action by the government machinery, the system. So that we understand that even though that even the people in the government sector understand what is to be done, but we know that there is a huge the system, the process to be followed. Even there is any issue with the process, many people raise issues on this process is the not followed, etc. So this is the reality. And we know that most of these government officers have been most of the time spent time on the CID, the bribery, custom, human rights. So this is the normal life of a public officer. That I should raise that one as well. But with regard to this, the port and shipping and even the aviation, that we have taken some actions in the recent past. Of course, that some of the actions have been there in the master plan, and we have expedited and go ahead with what is to be done. I would like to highlight mainly three things. One is the legal and policy perspective, and the secondly the capacity improvement perspective, and thirdly the efficiency improvement perspective. With regard to the policy and the legal environment, even though the customs ordinance does not come under our ministry, that there had been a series of discussions. CASA attended and other stakeholders also attended. We had meetings, and based on this, the issues raised, we went to the cabinet, and cabinet has appointed a committee, ministerial committee with five ministers committee, and committee highlighted the issues in the customs ordinance. And this report is submitted, and it has already gone to the Cabinet of Ministers. Unfortunately, the Cabinet has not yet taken the decision, because the Ministry of Finance has their concerns as well to be incorporated into this committee report. So that it is kept for 2 weeks. I believe that it will be taken up at the next Monday Cabinet meeting, and we expect that that decision will be given to amend the customs ordinance only for the selected sections of that ordinance. And in addition, that there are few actions that we also have taken to include, for example, that there are several regulations issued very recently. I don't know whether the many people are aware of on different aspects of regulations under this the Merchant Shipping Act. And we have, in addition, we are now taken the approval to amend the act related to this, all the stakeholders, freight forwarders, the terminal, the depot operators, etc. That we wanted to unbundle this, all these the sectors and see whether that we can address those different stakeholders differently. So that it is there that we have taken the approval, and it is in the hands of the legal draftman by now. With regard to this, there are some others that I don't want to highlight all these things that time passes. Let me talk about this, the capacity improvement. We all know that the government has already prioritized the logistics sector, and the president himself highlighted, and at the last budget speech also, the president himself declared that the logistic development should be carried out. We have the SLPA, in fact, that has identified several locations to be used for the logistics center. We all know that one location with the land size of 5 hectares has already been leased out to South Asia Logistics Center, and now they have already planned, it is given to the CM Port, and CM Port has already finalized the initial design and the detailed designing, and we believe that the foundation laying ceremony will be held in December, and which is having a capacity of 540,000 cubic meters, and it is a 7-story state-of-the-art building. We expect that it will really change the logistics center in Colombo. And in addition that, we have a similar land in the Blue Mandal. We have called bids to interested parties to come up with their proposal, but unfortunately there is no any bid received for this land. Further, that in the adjoining land of this the Blue Mandal land, which is under the UDA also called bids for the development of this the land, and there was no bid received. So we need to understand the investment environment and the economic environment in the country as well, that there is no any interest, either private financing domestically or FDI for indirect investment. So this is the situation where we are living at. This is the reality, even though we accept it or not. We did not even receive a single bid. This is so unfortunate, but we are ready to go ahead with that. We have now changed some the concerns, conditions as well, and we will recall the bids and see whether that there are some interested parties. We'll go ahead with that, and we believe that the logistic development is a must if we are going for this the hub expansion. So that we are towards that. With regard to the ECT and the WCT, I don't think that I need to elaborate all these things, because it is aware, right? Everyone knows what is happening. But Mr. Masakorala said that there is a delay in ECT. There is a slight delay, but there is no significant delay, I must say, even though that it is constructed under the supervision of the SLPA. And the civil work is now almost on track, and we are now the mechanical part, all the gantry cranes are being constructed, and we expect that end of March we will receive the gantry cranes, and during the month of April and May all the gantry cranes will be set up, and we have set the date as well on 1st of June 2024. We will operate the ECT with new gantry cranes, Of course, that existing aggregates will be shifted to JCT5. JCT5 is also being completed now. So that we are working on this. In addition to that, the construction that I will not highlight this. Yeah, that with regard to this, the land liberalization, we know that there are a lot of constructions, buildings in the SLPA port premises inside, and now with the development of port access elevated highway, that there is a direct link between this airport and the port, and which will be operative. We will make use of that port access elevated highway by August 2024. It is also going ahead, even though that there is a delay. That it was initially expected to complete by February 2024, but it will be done in August 2024. In the meantime, the SLPA headquarters building also being constructed. Now structural works have been completed. The other works are now being taken by the same company. There were some issues. We also need to understand that during this last maybe 2-3 years, if we estimate something for 5 billion, now it is more than 10 billion. So there is a huge problem in terms of this our process, in terms of tender process, in terms of the construction, in terms of finding finances. So all are issues that we need to understand this reality. But within which that we have already taken all the approvals and go ahead with that. And that building also will be available. At least a few floors will be available by August 2024. And by December 2024, the building is totally will be handed over to SLPA. So that in addition that the workshop building construction have been completed, some of this the lands will be made use of for the operation of SLPA. Further, that there are houses, SLPA employee houses, located in Totalang area, that is Blue Mandal area, which will be relocated to Mahara area. Mahara, there is a separate land, and we have obtained the cabinet approval. Procurement committees are appointed, and we have already drafted the bidding document. Bidding document is now have been given to the Ministry of Urban Development and Housing for their clarification as well, because this is a multi-story building, and we wanted to get a comment from the NHD and the UDA. So we are in that process. I would like to come to the third point, that is efficiency improvement. As my friend probably Kishanta mentioned, that the port community system. Now the feasibility study have been completed, and we conducted this workshop at the hotel, and I myself attended, but I could not continue in the workshop. However, that we are working with KPMG, and they have now already completed the bidding document. We have designed the governing structure, and we were thinking about whether we need the commercial regulator required or not. And we have finalized the basic governing structure with the participation of the private sector, and all this finalized. Once the bidding document is ready, probably within 2-3 weeks, we are ready to call bids from the interested parties, and we will go ahead with that. And in addition, that with regard to this airport community system, air cargo community system, we have already obtained the cabinet approval, and the procurement committee is appointed. Bidding document is being drafted, in fact not yet finalized. So once it's finalized, it will take ahead probably before the port community system, because we wanted to check because that the quantum is smaller compared to this the seaport, so that we can experience this air cargo community system earlier and see what issues that will arise, and we will address, so that we are working on this later on, that both will be coupled later together. So in addition that the document also itself identified that SLP is working on some of the work relating to digitization and digitalization both. We are in favor of this, the SLPS move. In fact, that for the time being, of course, we all know the SLPS majority is working manually, and there is a huge delay and other things as well. But we understand the importance of digitalization and moving towards that. So we have already encouraged this the move. Those are some of the few points that I wanted to highlight. Later on during this the discussion, we will interact with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ranchandra. That's a long list of things that government is currently engaged in, and we can only hope that they would contribute to the advancement of the logistics sector. I would like to move on to Mr. Ted Muthaiya, given his hands-on experience in the port and in the terminal. I mean, on the heels of what Secretary just said, Sri Lankan governments, particularly in the past few decades, as well as I think Sri Lankans by far seem to be obsessed with infrastructure. As against people development, processes, improving processes, better management, and things like that. I think one of the things we saw in the 90s in SAGT was you've been able to having new infrastructure alone, but you went beyond that to establish new processes and establish that. There was a comparison of SLPA versus SAGT staff and, moves per hour and things like that. Clearly that is needed, and now we have technology also coming in a big way. So how do we change this? That's my particular question to you. How do you change this mentality of not being obsessed with infrastructure and ribbon cutting ceremonies, to go beyond that, to make sure that we get the best result of what we have? Obviously we need new things, but maybe there are priorities of actually being able to use what we have efficiently, improve them rather than go for new things. So while commenting, I'm just asking whether you can, because of Secretary's updating us on what's happening. I was just thinking, putting together what Rohan was saying about education and Sanjeeva's point on technology and processes, your take as the last person, if you can share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Sanjeeva, commendations on the work that's gone towards this report, of course. I'd like to also acknowledge and appreciate the Gamini Korea Foundation for facilitating this forum today. I have the benefit, of course, of following many other eminent panel members whose opinions and views by and large resonate with what I would also have shared. So I thought, as I read, Sanjeeva, your report over the weekend, it took me back long years, back to my middle school report. It almost reminded me of the teacher's comments there. Underperformer, hasn't reached full potential, easily distracted from the task at hand, and that seems to be a very common theme in here. But at that time, I was given very good guidance to say, hey, pick what you like or what you're good at and try to make that better to be great. The other ones, try to make it good. Now, very simplistic approach, of course, but I think what we're talking about here, who is going to take the bull by the horns? We're all looking at government, we are looking at the president, right? And we are looking at everybody else except ourselves in the mirror, right? So I'll try to stick
to my area of so-called expertise, which is the terminals, because that is a marvelous story to tell. Looking through that, the key message here is that all is not lost. We have done some great stuff. It's just that we can't put it together consistently, right? So we talked about some of the disaster times where Sri Lankans come together and do some marvelous work. Maybe we need disasters all the time. So I don't know what the answer is, because clearly that potential is within us, and I mean within each of us, right? The difficulty, of course, is that you're looking at an electoral majority who reside in the rural area. I don't think we, as in people in the metropolitan area, maybe politicians, are actually communicating that well enough to make them understand why it's important, or how their lives will also be transformed by plugging into the global economy. Right? 21 million people, we are sitting besides 1.3 billion people, and we are perceived to be competing with them, not actually positioning ourselves as being complementary. And I'm referring to India. And that would be the elephant in the room. Everything else is fixable. So we talked about during COVID, we were able to, at SAGT, we were mission ready already to do this e-commerce, electronic delivery order. But we just couldn't get it done for 3 years. Right? Just like COVID came along, COVID was the best CEO for shipping lines. Made profits for them that they themselves couldn't make for so many years. Now there is some inference, I think the reference was obsession with capacity. Right? I think it's meant to set me up too, maybe. There's no obsession. The port capacity takes years to build. It's not something you can build overnight. Now, if you look back to some good stuff that the SLPA has done, Sri Lanka Ports Authority, in 2008 was when the South Harbour project was commenced. If you cast your mind back to 2008, we were facing the global financial crisis. Everybody said, hold your cash, right? Now, can you just fast track or go back and imagine if it did not have the CICT, the ECT, and soon to commission the Adani West Terminal, where would Sri Lanka be in so-called having this strategic geographic locality? What would that really mean? Because you don't have the capacity to handle the big ships that are happening. So that brings me as a good segue. If you're looking forward, because Sanjeev, when I read this report, I thought to myself, what next? Right? So I asked earlier, Sohan as well, does this go to the president? Right? If I was the president with all the other stuff that's going on, this will go into the for later basket. But I thought if I'm the president and I had only this thing to look at, nothing else to look at, I'd take this approach. I would first start with, what do our customers of today demand of us today and tomorrow? What is the opportunity for Sri Lanka? And what do we need to do more of to enhance this value proposition that we're talking about? So forget about this strategic locality and all of that. Every country can be strategic locality if you make it attractive enough for the customer to come. Because you're talking about 80% of our volume of 7.2 million, give or take, 80% being transshipment. Right? That's like if I give it to you in probably an easy way to understand. If you're flying to Australia from Sri Lanka, you could probably go via Malaysia, via Singapore, via Thailand. But what makes it attractive to go to one of those countries? Right? So looking ahead, what are the drivers of this? What are our customers looking for us to do differently? So technology has been addressed in the report very well. Digitization, digitalization, there's a difference. Mega data, we talked about supply chain ecosystems, trade lanes, and port exchange. Artificial intelligence, and examples that we do at SAGT, we're already looking at driverless trucks. Right? Again, is to improve the efficiency, reduce the safety risk, all of these. Now, there is no requirement by regulation that says we have to do that. But we're already looking 3, 4, 5 years down the track, is that humanly you can come to some level of efficiency. How do you now take it to the next level without putting human resource at risk? And I'm talking about heavy machinery, driving cranes for 12 hours or on shift basis, driving trucks, right? And on occasion, many of these people, probably when they're working on shift, they're probably doing other stuff during the day, right? So there's a big requirement to ensure that they also operate in a safe environment. Innovation we talked about, ships are getting bigger, right? If we don't have this capacity that's looking 4, 5, 10 years ahead, right, we will miss the boat. And literally we actually capitalized by having these big ship terminals, CICT, to bring these big ships, which actually saw us achieve the highest volume in a single year in 2021. Right? So these are some of the good news stories that we quite often forget about, right? And we focus on the negative. Now the negatives is okay if we take it in a constructive way of how to take it forward. So regulations are going to come in with IMO, renewable fuels, carbon net zero and so on. What are we each doing about it? Because there's no regulation in Sri Lanka that's saying you've got to get to net zero by 2050 or whatever. But we are international. As a terminal operator, we are internationals. Our customers are international. They would be demanding of us to support their initiatives and their aspirations to achieve net zero. So we've already started. We've actually used the same government consultant or commissioned company called Greenstat, where they are meant to give the government policy framework of how the Sri Lankan government can in fact transform this green energy. So we've commissioned them also to look at a study for the whole of Port of Colombo, not just for us, because only one terminal in the port is not going to help our customers who go to, they have arrangements with 2 or 3 terminals at minimum, right? So we are doing the study, we are underwriting the study, so that the Port of Colombo can then leverage that to say, okay, let's go down this path. We want to be able to provide green fuel in Colombo. As you probably read, India is already providing for that already in anticipation. So if we are unable to do it and India can do it on the west coast and east coast, it's very easy for the ships to just bypass Colombo and go ahead. So we need to be stepping 3, 4, 5 years ahead, even longer, even longer to stay relevant to our customers' demands. I would also agree with Sanjeeva that in his report he talks about the center of the globe. If you look at the ASEAN bloc nations, South Asia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, if you look at all that, the population is quite sizable. And this is the fast-growing middle-income earners also who are going to drive import and exports, the discerning buyers. We talked about all the logistics and the performance indices. Now we look at 2 at the port. One is where the port overall is. So we are at number 22 in terms of throughput. If you asked me 5 years ago, Sri Lanka was or Port of Colombo was the only South Asia port in the top 30 ports in the world. Today we have seen India, 2 ports, Mundra and Nhava Sheva, and Jakarta have also come in there. So this is reflective of the growing volumes in this area, where past Sri Lanka was shown because of the transshipment level we're handling, but now 2 ports in India, west coast, have come on board because of the fact that there's a lot more direct services also. We've talked about the single window. That's a long time coming, I think, right? So if I was the president, and I'm not, given this report and said, okay, what are you going to do? I will call all of the peak industry bodies, the associations, and I would say to them, give me 3 items that you regard to be the most important and critical game changers for your industry, right? The biggest challenge, and I've heard this from many other politicians also, or people in government, who will say, amongst the industry, you can't agree what is the most important for yourselves. How can I decide? Right? And that's true, isn't it? In large extent, because each of us look at it from our perspective in that supply chain and how it impacts. So why can't we sit down, or at least at the very least, put the 3 on the table, and you will find that there will be 1 or 2 that's going to be common to most. And let's start on that. But don't look to the bureaucrats to get us out of the way. We've got to roll our sleeves up and really make the difference if you want a different outcome. Otherwise, it's quite easy. Quite often we have visitors coming in here, they'll say, okay, why is that happening or this happening, and they will identify some bottlenecks. Our response typically, many of them, will be, welcome to Sri Lanka. We don't realize that we're actually showcasing that we ourselves have given up, right? You don't get that in any other country where we make fun of ourselves, of our inability to make things happen. Right? So somebody talked about HR. I think you asked me the question, where does attitude change? At school or at home? Right? We go home from work, we are frustrated and we start slagging off the company. Our children are feeding off that attitude. We don't realize it till it manifests itself 20 years later when they themselves are in work. So not much more to say here. But I think as we look forward and looking at the journey specifically about SAGT, we are encouraged, even many people at SLPA who've been there at that time of that competitive nature, recognize that when SAGT came on board, it actually propelled the Port of Colombo to a different level. We didn't get people from overseas, we actually acquired people from JCT into us. So we had to use the existing cadre who were at the QEQ berth, and that transformed it. What makes that difference? I think many of you will identify maybe people, relatives or family or friends who go overseas and they can drive a car straight in between the two lines and never cut the corners and do all those things. The same person comes back here and he then adapts to a difference. So it comes back to that process discipline. That's what generates the outcome. You have to stick to a discipline, and the same person can do it. I go into Australia and Rohan Masukorala will tell you, Sri Lankans are very well behaved, right? If you talk about driving, if you talk about a lot of things, I don't know a single Sri Lankan in Australia who's not doing well. And it's not because they're doing it the crooked way. Right? Very hardworking, but they get the best return for the hard work they put in. Now, why can't we replicate that here? Why do I have to go, if I'm standing in a queue somewhere, I have to get ahead of the guy in front of me? It doesn't matter, I can't wait patiently in that queue. So it comes back to, we are talking about Singapore, we are talking about some of the other countries that we want to benchmark to. What is different to the community there? I think it comes down to that civic discipline, that community attitude to understand, hey, look, if you want to cultivate something, you have to put in the hard work to get it. There's no shortcut to it. I'll wrap up there very quickly in terms of, I don't think the challenge we have is beyond us, but we really need to break it down. Pardon me if I tell you this story, but quite often I use this in the office. If you're hungry enough, you can eat a whole pizza, but you can't put that whole pizza in your mouth at the one time. Right? But if you eat it piece by piece, very quickly, if you're hungry enough, you can eat that whole pizza, but you can't put the whole pizza at the same time in your mouth. So that would be my response to say, look, take piece by piece. Right? In this book, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. I would say to all the peak industry bodies, the associations, give us 3 of your most important, what you believe to be game changers for the next 5 to 10 years, and let's sit down and get through them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ted. I think that's a good note to ask for your views, your contributions to what has been said here. A very, I wouldn't say optimistic, but I would say it's more realistic in the sense that we have no other option but to look at the best way forward. We have good examples to rely on, but I think we need to put our attitudes together. And in fact, while primary education needs a lot of improvement, but a lot of Sri Lankans who go overseas, not just migrate, even for employment, they shine well above others. Even our students that go, from housemaids to professors and scientists at NASA, they outshine many of their colleagues. So I think it's within us, but I agree with you that the environment, the lack of discipline, the lack of holding people accountable, I think these we seem to have lost as a nation, not just in the sector. And I'm not sure to whom we should turn. Is it to the political leadership, or is it something that we've got to generate and recover ourselves? So these are the hard questions, I think, facing all of Sri Lanka. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. Please keep your questions short and also direct your question to one of the panelists.
Thank you very much, sir. And also much appreciation for Sanjeeva's paper. I couldn't go through it, but I will take one point of Mr. Rohan Masakor Ararchi. I think you spot on the education side, because we were talking about all things that are not live. But education is what is the game changer, I would say. Because in Sanjeeva's note, he mentioned about mindset. So I will read this quote and end my comment. Education is not only about acquiring knowledge and skills, but also about instilling values and wisdom that guide us on a meaningful path. Education without values and wisdom is like a beating heart that lacks soulful purpose, devoid of true relief. So I think, Sir Kumarage, that is what our primary education needs. So that's what we are embarked on. We are trying to change mindsets through mindfulness. So we as an organization and also as a party, we are trying to instill this knowledge of how to treat, first value yourself, and when you value yourself, you tend to value others, and if you value others, you have a bond which will never be broken. So that is what we are trying to have, social and emotional learning also to the school curriculum. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you. Could you identify yourself also?
Yes, my name is Dr. Dhananjay Dharmaratna. I work for Land Development Corporation as a Deputy General Manager, Supplies and Stores. Mindfulness is my passion.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, please identify yourself.
I'm Linus. I'm a journalist. Well, I think it begins with our educational system. We have to invest in our human resources. That is not happening adequately. You go out to the provincial schools, you'll find that they are today studying, some of them are studying under umbrellas. You see, the conditions are so deplorable. And there is no emphasis on reading, writing and arithmetic as far as I can see. We have to begin there. It's all right, we are having our long-term plans as a nation, but you begin with this, with those brass tacks, with those fundamental issues of education, because without developing our human resources, it's impossible to go ahead. So I would like to find out what plans do we have in the short and medium term to make those improvements, to make, now we started off with the question of thinking beyond self-interest. Now how do we affect that? Because the elephant in the room is really that. You go to any level in the public, and you try to get something done, well, people think of what's in this for me. So how do we overcome that bottleneck? We have to start there. That is one of the fundamental issues I think that we have to address before we go ahead. I'd like to have your responses to that from the panel.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are touching on a very broad area of education and attitudes and values, but I think they are fundamental. But at least with respect to our sector, maybe Rohan, you want to try and answer that?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with you. That's what from my heart, what I said was a couple of things was the political will. I don't know any country that I have seen the prosperity comes with political leaders having a will, whether it is Israel to Japan to anywhere, that we cannot avoid that. Politics govern it. We are part of politics. So if we get our politics wrong, that is also going to drive us on the wrong direction. When it comes to the future of humanity and whatever we want to do economically, it's about our people, their skills, their ability to deductively think. I'm not talking about technocrats achieving something good, the cream of the country doing something well. very much Sri Lankans are doing, as Ted said, good in Australia also. But what about our people here? We are all not Australians. We are not all capable of migrating. Right now, a lot of brain drain is taking place. But what about the millions of children who are having a gap of education with the rest of the world? The new era, what Sanjeeva was talking in the paper, that's why I said there's a universe out there that we talk, some of us are exposed to it. But you go to the rural areas, talk about artificial intelligence and all these things, they're not going to have a conversation. So that is our future. What I'm talking about is our future, like how the Australians think or the Singaporeans think about their future. Now, when I started the Shippers Academy in Singapore with a British and a Singaporean, I was the third one, I was Secretary General of the Asian Shippers Council then. The Singapore government gave us $500,000 for us to set it up. You know, the vision was Singapore is a physical small hub. We want our people to have a global knowledge and to be positioned around the world so that Singaporeans are a virtual hub. That was the concept. So they said, start teaching us about international places, what's happening in South America, what's happening in Africa. Now today if you go to Rwanda, which is an up and coming country which had a violence, majority of the top people who are setting up the operations are Singaporeans. Right. So they go and position themselves. Now I was always telling Secretary, Sri Lanka Ports Authority should have been a global terminal operator. We should have been way ahead of other countries. Today Adani is coming and investing here. We had the knowledge, know-how and the start way before them. SLPA should have been a global brand. Why not? Because we pulled back. Now Philippines has its own terminal brands, right? Hong Kong has its own terminal brands. Singapore has. They are all investing. Sri Lanka Ports Authority is still looking at inward. We have missed something huge. So it's about knowledge, know-how and education is the future. As far as I see it, for whatever the hubs, we are in the logistics sector, same problem. If we don't develop that skills, know-how and knowledge, we are not going to compete. It's about tough competition out there. Absolutely tough competition. When you go to those countries, you can see it. Ports are manless now. People are not around ports. But we see hundreds of thousands around us. We can't look at India and compare ourselves and say we are better. Right? We got to look at the best of the best and say that is where we want to go. How do you go there? Build human resources, human capital and put money onto education if you want to change this country in 20 years, not in 5 years. But I personally don't see that happening. I am scared. We saw this economic crisis coming in 2006. There was a note sent to former President Mahinda Rajapaksa by Ronnie Dimel as an advisor. Sir, these borrowings are going to hurt us in the future. I have the letter. I am telling with evidence. And he said, we need to set up a social security system very fast. In 2006, he wrote to them, President. And it happened down the line. So I am seeing the same problem with education. The next problem we are going to, economic problem is going to be created by a bad education system if we are not going to change it. And that is the only thing that can change our attitudes and all that. The next generation. But I don't see it because I follow the Facebook, I follow this general attitude. When you see that, it's very scary for a country. That's why I said at the outset we can go from worse to worse if we don't have the right people in this country. We may be dead and gone. We're talking about 20 years ahead. The ground situation doesn't look very rosy for me. So I'm not a pessimist, but I'm trying to say the realistic situation. And our children should not deserve that. We should not deserve to have a $3,800 per capita income when we were ahead of Singapore, who is having $84,000 per capita income today. We should not deserve to have $3,800 when United Arab Emirates having $61,000 United States. That is the difference those kids are going to have in accessing education and everything. Thank you.
Also make some points. In fact, in my case, I have a lot of questions to ask. Rather than tell you because I know very little, but I learnt a lot listening, and particularly Mr. Abeygoonewardena paper was very useful, gave me a lot of food for thought, and told us about the importance of the shipping and logistics sector in the economy. Very good. And Mr. Muttaya was, of course, we learnt a lot from you all. You know the nitty-gritty, the real situation, all the others. My question is, now given that, all these, no point in just saying we should have done that, we should have, and I want to ask Mr. Ruwan Chandra, my good friend from the public service, do you have a plan to deal with these problems? Is there a plan? First question is that. Let me go on. And is that plan developed within the context of an overall national plan, so that all the symbiotic relationships between the shipping sector, the port sector, everything is combined with the rest of the... We heard a lot about education. You see? So, is it within the context of a national plan? And for that national plan, do we have a mechanism through which we consult the private sector? The national planning is not implemented only by the public sector, the private sector. And to do that, is the public sector competent? Do we have to train them, motivate them? And can you do all these things without having a good system of governance? Governance looks after all the issues, you see, transparency, accountability, predictability. Predictability is extremely important when it comes to, you see, dealing with business ventures. See, so, that is my problem is that, and you can't do these things piecemeal. At least where the shipping and logistics sector is concerned, there must be a national plan. You must be having one, and it would be interesting for us to know this. What we are trying to do from the Gamini Korea Foundation is to promote this concept of holistic approach. That's very important, and that is why we have formulated a program to get research done on 20 areas, sectors, subsectors, which we are going to put them together. And also, I must tell you, one of the most important objectives of this exercise is to consult our friends who are abroad, who have access to knowledge. I heard the word innovation being mentioned several times today. And there is a lot to be learned from the world. So, Sri Lankans abroad who are completely neglected, they are sorry that they can't participate in Sri Lanka's development process, And given a chance, they will do that. So, the SLIF project under which this is conducted, that is the Sri Lanka Innovators Forum. It's called the Innovators Forum, which was set up about a year ago, isn't it? About a year ago. And we have done this, we have started the ball rolling on 20 issues papers. I think about 14 have been completed. 14 or 15 have been completed, and so this is also one of those things. The reason is that at the end of the day, we must have a holistic approach to development. So, I don't want to take your time on this matter. So, let's start with the answer to my first question. Is there a plan, a holistic plan within the shipping and logistics sector? And is that, connected to a national plan? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Loy.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Dr. Lloyd Fernando. In fact, that with regard to this, the port, there is a master plan developed and finalized in consultation with all stakeholders in 2019 or 17, I believe, 17, and we are working with that master plan. That master plan focuses on the SLPA, that is Sri Lanka Ports Authority, not only for the Colombo port, but for the other ports as well, Gold, Trincomalee, KKS, Hambantota, etc. So with regard to this, the Colombo master plan, we are now developing this the South Port, which includes this ECT and the West Terminal. In fact, that part of this stage one of this ECT and the WCT will be completed in 2024 next year. As I said before, that by March the ECT 600 meters quay wall will be completed, and by December 2024 West Container Terminal, the stage one of this terminal will be completed. That is again 600 the meters. So the balance part will be completed by 2026. And later that, in fact, that for the time being, now we are working, we have already completed the feasibility study for the North Port development. Once the North Port is developed, by 2035, our total handling capacity will be increased from 7.2 million TEUs to 35 million. So this is the master plan we are having, and we are now working with for the port sector development. But this is not adequately coupled with the shipping and logistics. So that is why the logistics sector has been emphasized today, even especially by the government, and we have identified locations for this logistic development. So we believe that the investment should go to logistic development, and there is a significant the potential in the overall shipping as well. Mr. Masakora knows that there is a legal impediments which limit the operation. So we wanted to liberalize it. In fact, that my personal view is also the same. But there are different perspectives, different the opinions from different stakeholders. So that it probably takes a different view. That is why that the regulation is stagnated. But if we can go ahead with, as Mr. Masakora says, liberalization, definitely that there is a significant potential to improve the economic activities and the employment as well, and there is an investment as well. So that potential is there, but unfortunately that we cannot go ahead with that till we have the consensus amongst all stakeholders. With regard to the national planning, of course, for the time being, I believe that we are still working in a crisis situation. It is still the crisis management. Even though that there are some documents here and there, we are not geared as a national plan as such, even though that there are different policies and plans we are talking about. That is probably required, but not immediately probably. If we can overcome the current situation, probably in a couple of years, definitely that we can go ahead with that with a better plan. But for the time being, I believe that we are still trying to manage this crisis. Thank you, Dr.
Yes, I think we have to come to the end of the time allocated. I'll take quickly both questions together. Yes,
right.
You first.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for the session. And Sanjeeva, I think the document is very comprehensive in terms of, what needs to be looked at and how we needs to go. As clearly said by the panelists, it's like things to do, everything that we need things to do. So I have two questions. Sorry, I didn't mention. I'm Chaturanga Besing. I'm executive committee member of National People's Power. One is the discussion about capacity. I think from the government side, what we are talking about is capacity enhancement. In your paper, you are more talking about other factors that can take us there. So if you take all the factors that you talk about, transparency, digitization, and efficiency, it's corruption, right? It's political will. There's no political will to develop this country. We know that. That is number one. The other side, I want to understand, since we discuss more about this Colombo port, now we have another port, Hambantota. We didn't discuss much here. I want to understand this One Road, One Belt initiative, the China plan. How do we, are we anyway getting, can we succeed with that without doing anything? Will China make it happen? There's enough land, there's enough whatever that's required for transshipment. Are we just going to get benefited from that if we do nothing? So just want to really get my head around these two questions. One is on the, just by building capacity, can we really get there? And again, it's a will of politics. That means us, right? Nothing to do with we. I think doctor referred to bureaucrats and politicians. There's no difference between that. It's us who governs, right? So we haven't decided to be part of it.
Right. Yeah,
right.
I think your questions are clear.
Yeah.
We'll have the question from the gentleman over there.
Yeah. Good evening. Actually, it's not a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm Ranjit Wickramasinghe, the former chairman of Ports Authority in the 90s, and also the chairman of Ceylon Shipping Corporation in the 90s. And initially I joined the Ceylon Shipping Corporation when we set up the Ceylon Shipping Corporation in 1970. I was an accountant at that point, and I was associated with buying of the first ship, Lankarani. Actually, now I've come back to this forum. Thank you very much for this invitation from the Korea Foundation. I don't know, from somewhere I had an email about this event, and I'm here. So I have come back and listened to this forum today. Sanjeeva, thank you very much for your beautiful presentation. And I've heard all the senior officials, what their views are about shipping and ports and logistics. I have come back to this forum like this after 25 years, because since the first ship was bought in Lankarani, 1970, I think we have a problem here listening to everything that transpired here. We have a leadership problem. I think this has also been spelled by some of the people here in Sri Lanka. The problem is leadership. And I want to tell you my experience. In 1970, we didn't have a single
ship. We need to wrap up, Singer, in about a minute. Can you complete,
yeah.
please?
So I think it's a leadership problem. Because in 1970, we bought the first ship. After 7 years, we had 10 ships plying on all the 5 continents. And I can tell you, the Ports Authority, the year that I was the chairman, it made a profit of 3 billion rupees, the highest profit made by a public or a private sector. The best 3 performing companies in the stock exchange together could not make the money the Ports Authority made. And I was instrumental in negotiating the SAGT. And whilst I was the chairman of the port, Ken Balendra was the chairman of John Keels. I went through all those negotiations setting up the SAGT, and we went on into this PPP. One of the best formulas that was done. And I can remember when the proposal was made, even my managing director was opposed to it.
We need to wind up now.
So I think what Sri Lanka has is a leadership problem. If you find the right leaders, they will execute.
Right.
That's all I want to say.
Thank you for completing. Yes, so I think I will hand over to Rohan Maskorala for answering your question. And I wanted to give an opportunity to all the panelists to say anything in response to any of that. We may have like very short comments. Anybody? No? Yeah, and in that case, I'll ask Sanjeeva to respond to all what you've heard from both the panel as well as the audience. But before that, yes.
Yeah, I think you asked about the OBOR and the Chinese plan for Sri Lanka. First of all, let me tell you, the Hambantota port never had a business feasibility study. There were many infrastructure feasibility studies. In fact, the original port was supposed to be built in Abeygoonewardena, near Abeygoonewardena, there in Mathura, the original port. Then the Rotterdam group came and said something else. So, in fact, I was one of the speakers on the opening day of the Hambantota port. I was Asian Shippers Council Secretary General. I made a statement there also. I said it's a piece of infrastructure. Where is the financial plan? Where is the marketing plan? And where is the business feasibility for business? So it was never started with a proper business feasibility. So that is why it is a non-performing port. You must ask your customers, whether Maersk, MSC, Hapag-Lloyd, are you ready to business here? That was never a part of. Same with the airport also. I was at the Strategic Enterprise Management Agency at that time under Chandrika Kumaratunga, who initiated it. We asked this question from government. In fact, when ECT was West Container CICT was built, we asked, why are you giving 85% ownership to foreign direct investment? Fine, but this is the first gold mine in South Asia, which we said you must have at least 40% of shares, because this will have business from next day. So the policy makers in this country, as you said, maybe doesn't have a vision, mission, or their own agenda, right? So therefore, people who are professionals like us are like, we become failed policy makers. I know Dr. Rasim Salih, who came here, who was a lecturer at National University of Singapore and also in advising Germany, and today he's in UK. He very clearly says, I am a failed policy maker in Sri Lanka. Because we are not allowed to talk about numbers, you are not crunch numbers and forecast. Decisions are haphazard. I mean, Mr. Ruan Chandra would know as a public official how many shipping ministers we have had for the last 10 years. Right. He's also new there, right? He's also learning. I know he worked under Mr. Mangala Samaravira, right? Now that minister had some vision to understand the taking out the corruption and putting the problems right. So Hambantota itself was I would say a bad decision. The original decision was to make it a bunker port. That's why I said I talked with Ronnie Dimmel. Ronnie Dimmel has a paper in the SLPA. In 2002, he brought on all of us, John Keels, all, and had a 12-member advisory committee, and he said, Hambantota will never be built with foreign loans. That's his statement. He said, we will first develop South Harbour. That was in 2004. Any money coming out of that, we will put some money to build a bunkering jetty in Hambantota somewhere. That was I had the documents somewhere. So these were there. So we made wrong decisions. So today, I don't know, China can afford to hold that location because they are a rich country. They are cash rich. So for them, it's a strategically positioning themselves as a global power, as far as I am concerned. Whether they make a loss or profit, I don't think it doesn't matter to them. Right? They can hold on to it. So we got out of that getting by $1.4 billion, but we are paying the loan, but we paid some other loan out of it. So we have made, today as far as the economic crisis also, I'll finish here. Everybody has said it's about bad management. Nobody has to tell us anything else. No, we all know that. So we made very strategic bad management decisions in every sector. Sadly.
Thank you. Thank you. Now for some final comments, over to you, Sanjeeva.
Thanks. Lovely perspectives to further develop the concept paper. Just to answer to your question, as much as there is a dire need for leadership, I also feel we have a lack of followers. Everyone wants to lead and no one wants to follow. So we all go in many different ways. And probably that's also because we don't have one policy or a leader who can steer us through, or there is no one to guide us and say this is our true north. Just in summation, I think based on everyone's feedback, I also completely endorse the fact that education is the most important piece that we need to fix, because it'll give us a long-term and sustainable solution for our country. It's about how we can go to the next level of being an advanced society, and that's what's going to make or break Sri Lanka. Right now we will see a gap, but if we don't fix it now, we are not going to see anything in the next 10 years. So cut a long story short, there is no shortcut to winning this formula, although there are little bits and pieces of areas that we can fix, but this is all going to be on piecemeal basis. And we don't have to look too further. If we just can latch on to the growth trajectory of India, there is enough for us to gain. And the APAC region, Indonesia, Bangladesh, including Maldives, if we can just work around those growth trajectories, Sri Lanka can continue to leverage and gain some share on this. So that's my takeaway, and I think good input from all the panelists. Good to see there is some work done at a policy level, but what we need to do is to put all of this together and have some overview as to how this can help us earn that hub status in time to come. Thanks.
Right. Thank you very much, Sanjeeva. Sanjeeva spoke about leadership. I remember him leading the Pete Wright team, rugby team, in '96, if I'm not mistaken, at the President's Trophy final. So he's a quality leader from school days. So wrapping up today's session, I want to thank you all for being here, and to take small notice on the next few sessions that's going to come up. That's on October 3rd, Public Forum on Transport and Logistics. Professor Amal Kumarage will speak on that. And then we are going to have another forum on public enterprise reform. That's going to be on October 13th. Dhananath Fernando and Rehana Taufik will speak on that. I would like to have your presence for these sessions because they are very important for constructive development. You know, these forums are very important for that. And going forward, also we have one more announcement. That's the Frida Korea Awards. That's going to be in December, which we are going to honor women who have gone through struggles and they have written their stories, and we are going to honor them on that. So wrapping up, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the newspaper writer Sanjeeva Abeygoonewardena for his valuable contribution and thought-provoking paper that set the stage for our discussion today. Sri Lanka's strategic location holds immense potential to become a leading logistics hub. To achieve this, we must embrace innovation, think boldly and work together. We've discussed the global logistics landscape, the socio-economic context, and the importance of governance for sustainable progress. I extend my gratitude to Professor Amal Kumarage, our session chair. Thank you, sir. Our esteemed panelists, Mr. Rohan Masakorala, Mr. Ted Harin Butaya, Mr. KDS Ruanchandra, and Mr. Krishanta Fernando for their valuable insights and their time. However, I would also like to express our gratitude to all the participants and attendees who are here and who have joined us online. Taken time to join us. Your presence have added depth and value to this session. Special thanks to our chairman, our deputy chairman who is present here, and also our board members and also our GCF team. And also please log on to our website and post your comments, and your constructive criticism is very important. Thank you very much and have a good evening. You'll be served tea outside. Thank you.